If you're looking for incredible trans book recommendations, you're in the right place. In order to uplift and celebrate and prepare for the 2025 Trans Rights Readathon, I put out a call to some wonderful friends and fellow content creators to come on here and share some of their favorite trans books. The Trans Rights Readathon is an annual decentralized fundraiser and reading challenge that was created in response to a continued rise in anti-trans legislation and book bannings. This is the third year of the Readathon, and the dates are March 21st to March 31st. The idea is to read as many books as you can by trans authors and about trans characters, and to fundraise and make plenty of donations to trans organizations and individuals along the way. Please make sure that you're officially signed up so that you can be counted in this year's data, and that's going to be linked below. I'm also going to share the names and account links of everyone participating in this video, as well as a list of the books that they've recommended, all down in the description. Be sure to check out all of their content because they're wonderful and thoughtful and caring folks with very good book taste. But for now, I want to pass the mic along to my friends and their book recs.
Hi, my name is Haley, aka @SpoonieReads on Instagram. My pronouns are they, them, and I am so excited to tell you about a couple of my favorite trans reads for the 2025 Trans Rights Readathon. The first of my two picks is a non-fiction title, but don't be afraid, non-fiction, particularly queer non-fiction, is some of the most engaging stuff I've ever read. This is Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity by C. Riley Snorton. A lot of times when we talk about queer history, we are focusing on white bodies and white identities, but there's a rich and impactful history of trans folks, queer folks of color, particularly Black trans women, who have shaped so much of what we understand to be the queer, the trans community. And this book is one that has stuck with me for so long throughout grad school, into adulthood, and my career. This book helps you understand our roots as a community and the important role that Black trans folks have really played in shaping what this community looks like and what it can be. The second of my two picks is actually a really recent one. It's Stag Dance by Torrey, who you might recognize as the author of Detransition Baby, which really took the world by storm a few years ago. Stag Dance is one of the most fascinating in terms of structure of a book that I've read in a really long time. It's comprised of 3 novellas as well as a full-length story, and it is just unbelievably emotional. I have not cried this much in a book in a really long time, and this book hit me so unbelievably hard. Torrey has this brilliant ability to capture emotion, the really depth and breadth of feeling, particularly loss and identity and acceptance, and finding out what a sense of community can look like for really anybody. And this is a collection that I absolutely think you need to be reading. Whether you like short stories or not, these will leave you speechless, and they talk so heavily about what it means to be trans femme, what trans identity looks like, and how that process changes as we change right along with it. So I hope you'll pick these two up, and happy Trans Rights Readathon 2025!
Hello, my name is Elle, my pronouns are they, them, and you can find me everywhere at ERM Reading. Steph is exceedingly mean, letting me only pick a couple of books to recommend to you because I do have many that I would love to recommend, but today I'm going to keep it to one fiction book and one non-fiction book. The fiction book I would like to recommend you is Tell Me I'm Worthless by Alison Rumfitt. This is an adult horror book about 3 women who go into a haunted house and only 2 of them come out. And years later, the 2 that came out both say that the other one did something horrible to them, so they go back to the house to investigate. The house in this book is an allegory for the rise of fascism in Britain, and it's fantastically explored in here. It's an absolutely fantastic book, but it's also a very dark and brutal book, so please do check trigger warnings before you go in. And the non-fiction I would like to recommend you is the Transgender issue by Shon Faye. This is an exceedingly important, essential read for everyone who is interested in trans issues to me. It details the rise of transphobia both in Britain and across the world, as well as showing the material realities of what trans people are living through right now. And it fantastically shows how trans people are being used by the media and by politicians to stoke a culture war. Obviously, both of these books are primarily UK based, and as you can tell by my accent, so am I. And so is the charity that I am raising for the Trans Rights Readathon. I am going to be raising money for Mermaids, which is a trans youth charity that supports trans youth as well as fighting legislation that is harming them. Mermaids have been struggling because they have been inundated with harassment over the last few years since there has been a stark rise in transphobia in the UK, but they've also seen a massive rise in their workload due to many pieces of policy and legislation being brought in, particularly targeting trans youth. This year is the 30th anniversary since the charity started, and I would love to help continue the work that they're doing.
Hey, I'm Maddie Lim from @LimMaddie8 on TikTok and Maddie8 Stories on YouTube, and may I introduce you to FT Lukens. FT Lukens writes the coziest fantasies that you have ever read in your life. They're so quick and so lovable, and they all have amazing found family that just makes you turn into a pile of mush. My favorite book by them is easily Spellbound. We follow Rook, who has lived his entire life in the magical realm with his grandma, who's a sorceress, but then she passes away, and they have very strict rules about keeping humans away from magic, and he's desperate to get back into it. So what can one do but become an apprentice for a powerful sorceress who has a hotline for anyone's magical emergencies? And while working this job, he meets another apprentice for another powerful sorceress, Sun, and Sun is grumpy, wants nothing to do with Rook, but Rook is super drawn to Sun and can't seem to stay away from them.
Hi, I'm Naomi from the Mixed Up Desk. I'm an Indigenous book content creator, and I'm here to give you a recommendation for the Trans Rights Readathon. One of my favorite books to recommend is Two-Spirit Indigiqueer, Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. Jonny moved from the res to the big city, and he is looking to live, and he is looking for love, and he is just trying to survive. In 7 days, he has to go back home for the funeral of his stepfather, so this story is told within those 7 days in a non-linear fashion through snapshots of his life, through memories. It is absolutely exquisite writing. The main character is gorgeous and tragic and just trying to really find himself. Sacred, sexual, heartbreaking, hopeful. If you are a lover of words, you will absolutely love this book.
Hi, I'm Rachel from the YouTube channel Reads with Rachel, and I am here to recommend a book by a trans author. Thank you, Steph, for having me on. The book I wanted to recommend was Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. Freshwater is one of the weirdest books that I have ever read, and I mean that as the highest of compliments. Not a memoir, it is literary fiction, but it often feels like you're almost reading a memoir. But elements of it are drawn from Akwaeke Emezi's real life experiences. This is a very thought-provoking novel that takes a bold approach, transcending conventional storytelling, to discuss the complexity of selfhood. The novel centers on this main character, this young woman named Ada, who develops separate selves because she is born with, as the book calls it, one foot on the other side. These different selves represent different aspects of Ada's personality and her psyche. We watch as she grapples with her identity in this book, where Emezi has created a world where these boundaries between physical and spiritual have become more fluid, and it challenges traditional notions of gender and identity. So what we see in the book is these different selves coexisting within Ada's body, which lends itself to like the reader asking the questions of how we define who we are and how much of us and our identity being shaped is within our control versus out of our control. Reading this sort of feels like having an out-of-body experience where it's almost a little bit unsettling because again, those boundaries are being pushed and it's asking you to sort of zoom out and look at things from a different perspective on the concept of identity and identity being shaped. Causes you to be almost too introspective at times and it might make you a little uncomfortable, but I think that discomfort is what makes this book a 5-star read for me that I recommend to so many people because you have never read anything like this before. It makes you sit and think about all the different parts of yourself as you're watching all of these different parts of Ada, not just your identity within you, but your physical form as a human, the violence and the beauty that comes with inhabiting a body. This is something layered that you will want to savor slowly. This is something that you can read several times and you can gain so much from the experience of reading it over and over and over. I hope you'll check it out and thank you again to Steph for having me on today.
Hi readers, I'm Rachel. I'm a model who's read. Happy 2025 Trans Rights Readathon. My recommendation for you today is a little bit more on the macabre side because as much as I love a carefree, adventurous, uplifting novel with trans voices, sometimes you just want to read about a girl with a little darkness in her heart. And in this household, we not only support trans rights, but also trans wrongs. So if you are looking for a dark, sexy, twisty, political, high fantasy, romantasy novel with vampires, I would highly recommend Mistress of Lies by Enright. Full of dark magic, mayhem, and murder, we have a trans author writing about trans characters and a world where a vampire king tasks 3 people to catch a killer loose in the city. We first have Shon, who is the daughter of a once great but now disgraced house of blood workers, and ooh, I am an absolute sucker for blood magic, pun intended. Sam, who's a lowly dock worker who finds finds out he has a special kind of magic that's caught the eye of the vampire king. And Isaac, who's a royal blood worker and right-hand man to the king, who has a sordid history with Shan and very many secrets of his own. Everybody in this book is delightfully queer, with Isaac being our trans character, and the discussions in here on blood and the body and autonomy really reflect Isaac's journey. Full of treason, betrayal, vengeance, and desire, this bloodthirsty book shows the lengths that people will go to for absolute power. So if you're looking for a new story with trans rep that will seize you by the throat, I think this is the one.
Hi, I'm Emma Skies. You can find me everywhere at Emma Skies, and I have a couple of books to recommend for the Trans Rights Readathon, as well as an author whose entire body of work I adore. First is Most Ardently by Gabe Novoa. This is a YA Pride and Prejudice retelling wherein Darcy is queer and the second eldest Bennett is a young trans boy named Oliver. This was a book I picked to read sort of piecemeal over a holiday break whenever I had time, and then basically ignored my family for a whole day and read the whole book in almost one go. I'm a sucker for anything Pride and Prejudice, the book, the movie, the miniseries, retellings, and I adored this. I wouldn't go in expecting like a one-to-one recreation, but this is a really delightful story, and there's some really interesting historical context around being queer in the early 19th century, at least for the upper class. And now that I've pulled this out and I'm thinking about it again, I want to reread it. And a second one that I'm sure may pop up in this video multiple times is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, because yeah, it's just that good. This is a YA fantasy about a young Latinx trans boy who's determined to prove to his family that he is a brujo, and so he sets up this ritual that ends up going awry, and he accidentally summons the spirit of a kid that he goes to school with who no one is aware has died, not even the kid himself. This is top of many people's lists for very good reason, and it's one of those books that like you read it, and this book came out in 2020, I read it in 2024, and like you read it and then you're really mad at yourself that you took that long to read it, because what have you been doing without this in your life? I read this almost entirely on a cross-country flight, and the hardest thing about that was trying to be pretty inconspicuous about how much I was crying. I don't think I succeeded. I think everybody next to me did realize that I was crying, no matter how hard I tried to be really chill about it. By the time we landed, which again, I finished the last page like 10 minutes before we landed. By the time we did, my mask was like soaked with tears. The book is phenomenal. You should read it. I really, really, really loved it. I read 101 books last year, and this is one of only 5 that I rated 5 stars. And then hands down, one of my favorite authors is Ava Reid, who is non-binary. I would recommend anything from their body of work, but my absolute favorites are Juniper and Thorn, which is an adult horror fantasy horror, and A Study in Drowning, which is a YA dark academia fantasy. Both easy 5 stars. I adore these books so much. And then the most recent release, Fable for the End of the World, is a sapphic YA dystopian, a love letter to the Hunger Games, and there are some really interesting subtextual things on gender in this book that I find really compelling. Again, love their whole body of work. So there's some recommendations, and thank you to Steph for putting this together.
Hi, my name is Seth, aka Drama King Books on Instagram and TikTok, and these are 2 of my favorite trans books to recommend. The first one is The Prospects by KT Hoffman. This is an own voices trans romance where Gene, our trans MMC, plays for a minor league baseball team, and his ex-best friend from college gets traded to the team, and so now they have to navigate a new relationship together while also developing feelings. And this book just celebrates trans joy, queer joy. It's gorgeous. The romance is so heartfelt and deep, and it's really just gentle in the way the story is told. KT really knocks it out of the park and will pierce your hearts with this one. The next book is Rules for Ghosting by Shelley J. Shore. This is part Jewish family epic and part romance as we follow Ezra, our trans MMC, who has lost his job, has to work for his family's funeral home in the meantime, has a new neighbor moving in downstairs who has lost his fiance, and Ezra can see ghosts on top of all that. This is a beautiful story about found family, about finding love in the places you least expected, and about cultivating the relationships that are around you. I think this book is gorgeously written, it's lush, and I think it's a beautiful story about how Ezra finds love romantically, platonically, and develops new connections with his family that were not there before, and Shelley really knocks it out of the park. This is a gorgeous book. It's ghosty, it's spooky, and romantic.
Hi, my name is Crystal, or Crystal Lotusling across platforms, and one of my favorite stories that centers a trans character is Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. It follows Katrina, who is a transgender musical prodigy with very little formal training, when she crosses paths with a world-class violin player that happens to have a deal with the devil and a star captain refugee from space. It is a beautiful mashup of sci-fi with some romance. I've also got a book recommendation for a book written by a trans author. One of my favorite authors is Akwaeke Emezi. I will read any and everything that they write, but my favorite book of theirs is Bitter. Bitter is about the power of protest and how there's not just one said way to protest. And it's a middle grade book, and it is a great story for people of all ages.
Hi everyone, I'm Noxor. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a disabled, queer, neurodivergent woman of color who loves reading books and always getting book recommendations. Honestly, if you give me a recommendation, I'll probably read it. You can usually find me on the social media as Nox_reads, like on TikTok and Instagram and Blue Sky, or you can find me here on YouTube as Nox Reads, where I am going to be posting videos. I've had a channel for like 5 years, but I need to post. Or mostly at Feminist Book Club, where I am a contributor, and usually they're screaming about craftivism, accessibility, my cat, and how much I love my local library, because that's how I'm able to read books. And speaking of my local library, the book I'm recommending, I found through them, and it's Falling Back in Love with Being Human by Kai Chang Tom. I love this book so much. I just love this book so much. It's a poetry collection, and I'm not usually a poetry person unless it's an audiobook, but I didn't know it was a poetry collection when I picked it up. And I picked it up as an ebook, and honestly, regardless of format, this book is amazing, and I do need a physical copy of it because I just want to keep coming back to it. And I am, because I'm going to be reading it during the readathon. She writes poetry about being a trans femme of color while also being disabled and being a sex worker. And her poems are written as letters because the tagline of the book is Letters to Lost Souls. My favorites are To the Ones This World Was Never Made For, To the Goddess of Vengeance and the Goddess of Mercy, To the Death Walkers, and To the Martyrs. And honestly, if I can't convince you based off of those titles alone, I don't know what else I could do here. Her writing is just absolutely beautiful, and honestly, when I was reading it last month, I really needed it, especially To the Death Walkers, and I still do, which is, again, why I'm rereading it. And what I love the most is that each poem is followed by an action item of sorts, so I wanted to share the one that follows To the Sisterhood of Trans Femmes. If you are a trans feminine person, write a list of reasons you love being a trans femme, and a list of reasons you hate it. If you are not a trans feminine person, write a list of ways you can become more knowledgeable about trans misogyny and more supportive of trans femmes in your life and the world. Like I said, I'm going to read this again, and I can't get enough of it, and I can't recommend it enough. 2 spoons, though, I'm not sure how active I'll be during the actual readathon, but I wanted to share that my best friend Laya, who is a disabled trans Muscogee native, has an ongoing mutual aid request as they wait for an SSI disability decision, and honestly, I can go on and on about the state of disability decisions, and that's a whole other thing. But they and their fiance are currently living in a toxic housing situation and need funds for medication, appointments, food, ongoing survival, honestly. If you're able to, their Venmo and PayPal are at capital W, capital H, and then lowercase OLIFIELD. Like I said, it's ongoing, so if you're able to help them out at a later point, that would be amazing. And I hope you all read this book, and if you're able to, that you help my friend. But regardless, I hope you all have a great trans rights readathon, and I'll see y'all around. Bye.
Hi, my name is Alex. I use you, him pronouns. My username is @CemeteryGay. The first book I'm going to recommend for the Trans Rights Readathon is Lake Lore by Anna Marie McLemore. It is one of my all-time favorite magical realism book by one of my all-time favorite authors. It is a beautiful, beautiful exploration of the intersection of race, gender, and disability. The prose in this book is absolutely gorgeous. The cultural elements are so well integrated, and I think it is a particularly unique look into trans identity that I would highly recommend everyone check out. It is one of the first times I really felt seen as like a Mexican trans person in a book. The next book I'm going to recommend is Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. It is an adult science fiction novel. It is one of my all-time favorite books, period. Just like the last book, it is absolutely beautifully written, and part of what draws me so much to this book, particularly as a trans person who's also a person of color, is that it very much acknowledges the reality of what it means to be a trans person of color, what it means to be a woman of color in today's society, while still taking a realistic but
outlook on how we can make things better, how you survive as a marginalized person in the society. These science fiction elements are so absolutely beautifully well blended into the main story, particularly a lot of the parallels it makes between these like alien creatures, these more fantastical elements in the very real world oppressions that these characters are dealing with are so beautifully well handled. It will definitely not a fun or comforting read. It is something that I find very cathartic to read, and I think a lot of you would connect with and would enjoy.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for sticking around, and I'm back to toss one more trans book rec at you because what the heck, I can't help myself. If you're a poetry lover or if you want something that's short but that's still going to impact you for a very long time, check out Blood Orange. I hesitated to put this one in my first video because honestly I think it's better experienced outside of a readathon setting, so that you have the spaciousness and the time to sit and reflect on each poem before you move on. But maybe you could spread it throughout the readathon, like read a poem every morning and every night, something like that, so that you have time to sit with it and to process each one. These poems are beautiful, clear, compassionate, and strong. The author is Palestinian, and they're processing their grief and their anger, and also their desire for their home and just a world where they feel safe and valued. They're defiant, they're thoughtful, and they're quietly hopeful. And this tiny collection is deeply moving. Anyway, if you want even more trans book recs, I put out a video last week with over 30 of them. Plus, the Trans Rights Readathon official website has several spreadsheets and master lists with so many books. There's even a spreadsheet specifically dedicated to indie authors, so please make sure you go check it out. Don't forget to sign up for the readathon, and please, please, please keep spreading the word, keep boosting the readathon, keep boosting trans books, and keep fundraising. Book recs are welcome in the comments. Feel free to pop down and like request a specific rec too if there's something you're searching for. Thank you so much to all of my friends and content creators who submitted videos to be included in this. I really appreciate you all taking the time, and thank you to everyone for sticking around.